Welcome back to the Monday Morning Point Guard podcast. On today's episode, going to be doing a little bit of pre-draft coverage, more specifically talking about the player that I've seen number one in most mock drafts in Chet Holmgren. He's a really controversial player in terms of what people's view his potential as. So what are the positives of him as a prospect, negatives, and what kind of role do I see for him in the league? If you did enjoy the video, please be sure to like it as well as subscribe for weekly content. Also, the podcasts are now up on Spotify, so you can listen to the full episode uninterrupted there. And if there's a spot you agree with, disagree with, either reach out to us on Twitter or in that comment section, and we'd love to discuss with you. So it's getting to be about that time to do the pre-draft coverage and start talking about the prospects as we head into kind of the end of the regular season, and then draft lottery is coming up, and we can really start to nail down who we think these prospects are. I've admitted multiple times throughout the course of doing this podcast, I don't watch a ton of college basketball throughout the year. There are just only so many hours in the day. So I'm not going to be doing breakdowns on every first round prospect or the first and second round prospects, but I at least want to get to the top three, especially since the top three this year feels like guys who were all created or creative players in NBA 2K. Like, they're just insane. And Chet is the guy that I've seen tossed around the most as the number one pick. And for me, at least, I don't think there's been a harder prospect to evaluate in terms of a top prospect during my time following the draft in the NBA. He really is just the ultimate high ceiling, low floor type guy. And the more I've kind of watched him, the more confused and unsure I am about his future in the NBA. You could convince me easily 5 years from now that he's an all NBA type guy, a total bust, or really anything in between. And I know I'm not alone there. So let's really break it down here. Let's take a look at the good, the bad, and then also what type of role he could thrive in the NBA. And I guess first we should start by breaking down what Chet is as a player. And at Gonzaga, he's a 7 foot tall, 195 power forward / center, I would say. And during his time at Gonzaga, he put up 14 points a game, 10 boards, 1.7 assists, and 3.7 blocks on 60% field goals, 39% from three, and 72% on free throws. It really, as a player, he's a silky smooth ball handling 7-footer, a potential defensive anchor on one end of the floor, and then he has guard type skills on the other. As far as unicorns go, he has the chance to have his picture next to the definition of that in the dictionary. And when you look at him, it's hard not to just see Kristaps Porzingis, but I actually don't think that's a very good comp for his offensive game. The Knicks version of Porzingis was really a big guy with some perimeter skills, whereas Chet really feels more like a guard in a big man's body, or a guard who happens to be 7 feet tall. And as far as the positives for Chet as a whole, his defensive aptitude has to be at the top of the list. He set a record for blocks in a season at Gonzaga, and obviously nearly 4 blocks a game. He's going to be just an elite shot blocker. He's a 7'5" wingspan, and with his go-go gadget arms, it seems like he always is surprising opponents with the contest radius that he has. When they're trying to shoot over the top of him, they seem like surprised that he's blocked the shot or has made like a really strong contest. And my favorite thing about his shot blocking piece and that part of his game is just how smart he is about that. So many times with young players, you see them kind of flying in with very little control or very little regard for their body or the offensive player's body, in hopes of like batting the ball into the 10th row or spiking it into the 10th row. And Chet really doesn't do that. He allows that superior length that he has to do the work for him. And he's using verticality to contest and block shots, very similar to the way Roy Hibbert used to do it, rather than flying in weak side and just hammering the ball into the 5th row and crushing the guy with the ball as a result. And also to go along with the way he uses his verticality to contest shots, he's also got really great timing on that end. And that's also aided by the fact that he has probably the biggest block or biggest contest window in the country. And that's a term I just kind of made up. But if you think about the timing it takes to block a shot, a guy like Chet at 7 feet tall with a 7'5" wingspan is just going to have a wider margin for error in terms of the timing that it takes to effectively contest or block a shot because of his length. He can wait on the jump and he has less distance to cover both vertically and horizontally versus a smaller shot blocker like maybe a Ben Wallace or a Bam Adebayo who's only in like the 6'8", 6'9" range. Those guys have to jump higher to block the shot, and as a result of just their lack of stature, they really have to nail the timing of their jump when they're contesting shots around the rim. Chet doesn't really have to do that. And also on defense, he's really mobile, and I think he's going to be able to hold up fine when he's switched onto guards at the next level. Now, I don't think he's going to be able to lock up guards, kind of like Bam Adebayo does on the perimeter. He doesn't have the elite lateral quickness, but I think he's got just enough. When you combine it with his length, he could give guards trouble at the next level, or at least hang in there and not completely embarrass himself. And just in general, for a young player, Chet has really great instincts defensively, and he seems to just play really great positional defense. He knows when to be in a certain spot, where to be, and he just always seems to be in the right places. Now, offensively, Chet is a highly skilled and extremely fluid player with or without the ball, especially for a guy his size. This isn't the case of some big, goofy, skinny kid with 2 left feet. He really moves well around the court. He has basically every shot in his arsenal. He makes several plays a game that just completely drop your jaw. Early on in that Memphis game during the tournament, he attacked a closeout. He did like a crossover or something, got around the defender, ends up doing like this shimmy shake, half spin fadeaway in the paint. And I was just like, oh my God, just because you don't see 7-footers moving like that. And for Chet, he could take you off the dribble with either like a straight line drive, or he's got a pretty nice crossover. He can hit you with a hezzy. And once he's in the paint, he has this really nice spin move gather off the dribble, or he can just finish over the top of you because he's huge. And shooting wise, while he isn't like a pure sharpshooter like a Karl Anthony Towns or a Dirk Nowitzki, he's still pretty effective from deep at 39% threes in college. And he's going to be able to hit the spot up shots off of like catch and shoot opportunities. But also what you can see him do is he kind of dribbles into shots. He's not going to be hitting like step back threes like we've seen Cat do. And we really didn't see a lot of pick and pop from him either. But in terms of like spot up opportunities and just kind of dribble walking up into a three, he can do those things. He's also got tremendous touch around the hoop and around the rim. And that really serves him well finishing around the basket. He's really efficient around there. He shot 60% on field goals, which is just insane. And despite Chet only averaging 1.7 assists a game, I think that's really an underrated part of his game. He's a really underrated passer and playmaker. He's far from like a Jokic level, like a really elite playmaker, either vision-wise or just general pass accuracy, but he's still got enough that it's going to serve him really well in the NBA. He's just a really willing passer, and we've seen him make some great drop-off passes to Timmy in the post or kicking it out to shooters. He just seems to make the right read really often, especially for a big guy. That's something that Joel Embiid has really struggled with throughout his career. He's kind of getting it together now, but it seems like Chet already has some of that or maybe all of that added to his game, that he's going to be able to pass on a double team is really effective should he get double teamed at the next level. Rebounding wise, he's a really great rebounder. And I guess that's to be expected for a 7-footer, but when you look at his frame, you may not expect that as much. And you would really probably feel like you would see him get pushed around a lot under the hoop on box out opportunities, but it really doesn't happen as often as you might think. And when it does, when he is getting kind of pushed around down there, a lot of times it just doesn't even matter because his length just allows him to kind of scoop up any rebounds. Like you're so focused on kind of moving him out of the way, he just kind of reaches over the top of you and grabs it. And on the offensive board specifically, he has a really quick second jump, and that soft touch I mentioned around the rim, he's a monster on putback opportunities on the defensive glass. And this is probably my favorite part of his package altogether, him as a prospect. Chet can just get the rebound off the miss or one of his block opportunities, and he can lead the break, sort of like what we used to see Draymond Green do when he was younger. And while Chet isn't the passer or playmaker that Draymond is, he's a far greater threat to score than Draymond has ever thought about being in that type of scenario. He can take it all the way to the cup, or if you sag off, I mentioned earlier, he can walk into one of those 3-point opportunities on the break and bury it. And as stated, he's a pretty solid passer. So if you're going to overcommit to him on a fast break type scenario, he's going to be hitting the open man with no problems. Now, the case I've just laid out for him makes it sound like he's a really complete basketball player. In a lot of ways he is, but there are still some really major concerns or question marks with him, and that's what makes it really difficult to evaluate it. I think we should get the biggest one and the most obvious one out of the way, and that's his weight. 195. That's just too skinny for a player of his height. And to put that into perspective, he weighs about as much as Kyrie Irving. He's nearly a foot taller than Kyrie Irving, and they weigh the same. And in a lot of college matchups, he was able to mitigate some of those strength issues with his length. But in the tournament, some of those issues were on full display. As a driver, even as a guard, if it seems like if you get into his chest off of the drive, you can just move him out of the way, push him under the basket, which is obviously really going to limit and almost at times can negate what he can do as a shot blocker. And during the Memphis game specifically, while not everyone on Memphis was an NBA caliber player, there were a lot of NBA caliber athletes out there, and they were attacking Chet with no fear whatsoever. He still ends up in the game with 4 blocks, but they were able to get him into foul trouble as a result of that. In post-up scenarios, there's going to be basically no chance he's going to be able to contend with bigs like Embiid at the NBA level based on what we saw in the Memphis game where they were just kind of tossing him around. How big of a concern is this actually? I think it's a pretty huge concern, and I don't think it's one that he's going to be able to solve or he's equipped to solve. I have seen Chet supporters say, well, Anthony Davis, Dwight Howard, guys like that were really skinny. Giannis, they were really skinny when they came into the league and they filled out. And while that's true, Anthony Davis and Giannis is just a complete freak anyway. I mean, he grew 3-4 inches from when he entered the league, so that's not really a good comparison to draw. I don't think that's going to be the case for Chet. But with Anthony Davis specifically, even though he was skinny, he still had a frame that made it look like it was going to be possible to pack on some muscle onto him. He had the broader shoulders, and I'm no expert on human anatomy or personal training, but Chet just doesn't seem to have the frame like a young Anthony Davis or a young Dwight Howard, young Giannis. Before they put on the weight, it still looked like they could fill out. There was room to fill out. Chet is kind of hunched over and he's got really narrow shoulders. It just doesn't look like he has the body type that's going to be able to carry around a bunch of weight. So the answer can't just be bulk him up, because if his frame can't handle it, then you're going to risk a ton of injuries. And Kristaps Porzingis is a really good example of that. And he was a guy who was fairly skinny, and then they bulked him up, and now he just can't seem to stay healthy. So the reality for Chet is he's likely just going to be like a Kevin Durant type body type versus an Anthony Davis, a guy who's just really skinny, and he's just going to have to find ways to work around that strength issue. Durant never really solved it. He never really bulked up. I mean, he toned up a little bit, and I expect Chet to do the same, but as far as adding a ton of mass, Kevin Durant never really did that, and I don't expect that Chet will either. And to Chet's credit, he's still a really tough kid. And with his frame, you might expect him to kind of shy away from contact and not want to get beaten up too much. But he really hangs in there and he takes the beating, even if his matchup has a huge strength advantage on him. One of the other big concerns here is, can Chet create his own offense at the NBA level? It's something we really haven't seen him do in college. And this concerns me less just the fact that we haven't seen him do it in college. And despite the tournament results and like where he kind of struggled, at least offensively, didn't put up big stats, he was on a fairly loaded college team and he wasn't asked to do a lot of his own scoring. Tournament wise, he spent a lot of time in foul trouble. Memphis game aside, that Arkansas game where he had his last 3 fouls in that game were just completely ridiculous. It was complete nonsense. So I don't want to overreact to like him picking up 3 fouls on really bad calls. And to kind of illustrate the offensive point, why I don't think his production in college is a huge concern for me, projecting him as a scorer or production wise in the NBA. I'm going to put up a graphic here for those on YouTube where we've got Chet on one side and an unnamed player on the other side and just compare their stats. They look really similar. And for this, player B is Anthony Davis. He was also on a really loaded college team where he wasn't asked to do a lot of scoring. He was mainly there for his defense, at least in the confines of that team. And that's worked out just fine in the league. And I'm not saying that Chet is Anthony Davis or will be a player anywhere near that in terms of his potential, or especially not play style wise. But my point is both of those guys were on really good teams where they weren't asked or needed to carry a huge creation load offensively. Drew Timme is clearly the engine that drives this team, and everything offensively that Gonzaga does revolves around him. Even the guards on Gonzaga, it felt like at times they would even forget that they had Timme, Muslich, Chet down there, and they would kind of go rogue and do their own thing. And in the times that I watched Gonzaga, almost no sets were ran with the intention of setting up scoring opportunities for Chet. And I really hesitate to say that Chet's scoring even came from within the flow of the offense, because I think that would be a slight to him. It felt like most of his scoring, at least during the tournament, was junk type scoring, getting offensive rebounds, fast breaks, just kind of like hard working his way into some production. So I think at the NBA level, if you catered to him a little bit more, I think the production would be there. But I think nevertheless, it's good to know that he's able to get 15 or so points a game off of basically hard work and basketball IQ alone. And while Chet isn't like a clear everybody out and watch me cook type scorer, he has shown enough of a bag at the NBA level, especially as a 7-footer, that he's going to be able to score. My last big concern for Chet is where he gets drafted and what his role is going to be. Sort of like when Zion entered the draft, albeit for almost the opposite reasons with Zion versus Chet. It's hard to imagine a role. It was hard to imagine a role for Zion because we really hadn't seen a player like that. Sure, there were shades of Charles Barkley and Larry Johnson with Zion, but it was still a totally different thing, something we really hadn't seen before. And Chet is in a really similar boat, like I said, for almost the opposite reasons. He really doesn't fit into like these old archetypes we have, like the stretch 5, a 3-and-D wing, combo guard. He doesn't really fit into any of those boxes. So it isn't going to be the easiest of transitions for an organization. You're not just going to be able to slide him into one of these kind of predetermined roles and expect him to thrive like you would some players. And I really feel that if you draft Chet, especially at the number 1 pick, if that's the direction you decide to go, more than any of the other players being considered for this number 1 pick, you as an organization, a coaching staff, a front office, you have to have a really clear vision of how you want to develop him, what you want him working on, and what you want his role to be on the team. Scotty Barnes is a guy that kind of came to mind as well from last year's draft, who could have really suffered if he ended up in the wrong situation on the wrong team that wanted him to play like a traditional power forward in this modern day. If a team had told Scotty Barnes to just go stand in the corner, stay out of the way, you're not going to get any ball handling duties or any playmaking duties, that would have been a total disaster for him. So like the Raptors did for Barnes, Chet is going to have a role kind of catered to him that allows him to do the things he does well. And that role doesn't exist in our more modern, traditional archetypes. So What do I think Chet should be? How do I think he should play? I think with his strength issues and issues in that department, I think the stretch five, I think him playing the center is totally off the table for me. Similarly to what the Cavs did this year with Mobley, I think he's going to have to play alongside another center who can take that Joel Embiid matchup, take that Jokic matchup. Even guys like Steven Adams, those really strong centers, they're going to eat him alive. And if you're going to ask him to hold up for 82 games, he's going to need someone who can bang with those centers in his place. I still want him in a position to block shots, but I don't want him getting beaten up every night and shoved under the hoop like some nerd getting shoved into a locker just night after night. Offensively, though, this is where he could be really fun. And I really don't want him relegated to stand in the corner or stand at the top of the key duty like we see with some bigs, and specifically Brook Lopez, where he just kind of hangs out at the top of the key and shoots threes. I think you should sprinkle that in with him, but he can do a lot more than that. Same with pick and roll with him as the roll guy. I think that needs to be sprinkled in for his offensive package, but I don't want that to be the main part of what he is as a player. So to kind of define like a more specific role for him, I think sliding into like a Warriors Kevin Durant role combined with like a little bit of the Bam Adebayo piece. I obviously don't see him as the next Kevin Durant as a player. So what do I mean by like the Warriors specific version of Kevin Durant? If you think about that version, he really wasn't doing a ton of dribble the air out of the ball, ISO type stuff like we see with the Nets and like we saw earlier on with the Thunder. He was moving a lot off the ball and setting up chances where he could catch and shoot or make a quick 1 to 2 dribble move, either getting to the basket or setting up like a mid-range shot. I think if you run Chet off the ball similarly to that, he could be really effective. He's shown that he has the IQ to really move off the ball, and that's something that's going to utilize his skill set. As I've mentioned, he's not an ISO break you down off the dribble type guy, but he can still give you a hesitation, a crossover, a spin move. He can get to the cup. He can use his size to pull up over the top of defenders. He can do like a straight line drive or get one of those spin moves going in the paint. I really wouldn't want to see him dribbling the ball more than 3 to 4 times in his scoring opportunities. And I think that the more you limit his dribbling and just allow him to kind of make quick decisions off the ball, or once he catches it, get him in space a little bit where he can attack big guys, I think that's where he's going to be most effective. For the Bam Adebayo component of this role, I would obviously love to see him being Chet, get chances to lead the fast break. I think that goes without saying. But in the half court, you could get the ball into his hands in the high post and let him hit some cutters or run some handoff type stuff. We've seen him be really dangerous as a playmaker and a scorer when he's one dribble away from the rim. So they really need to set up those chances for him. And for God's sakes, just don't have him only posting up in the low block or only standing in the corner. Chet Holmgren is likely going to be the most controversial player in this year's draft, and it's likely going to be years before we get an answer as to what he is. But what do you guys think? Do you think he's going to be an all-NBA, all-star level player? Do you think he's just like a starter or a role player? Or is he just going to be a total bust altogether?